There's a kind of silence that isn't empty at all. It's a silence that speaks, a silence that vibrates through the air, like the quiet hum of something sacred returning home to itself. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt it too. The moment when you finally stop chasing, when you stop waiting for someone to notice your presence, and instead, you notice yourself. It's almost strange, isn't it? How a simple shift, from reaching out to reaching within, can change everything. You start to feel your own energy coming back, like pieces of yourself that were scattered, finally finding their way home. And something in the air changes. You can sense it, even if he can't explain it. He feels it too. Louise Hay always reminded us, the only person who accompanies me my entire life is myself. My relationship with me is the most important. And when a woman starts living from this place, when she withdraws not out of anger, but out of reverence for her own soul, everything reorganizes around her, even him, especially him. You see, the masculine feels it, maybe not with words, maybe not even consciously, but at the deepest level, his nervous system picks it up. Your absence, your withdrawal, is not rejection. It's not punishment. It's not a game. It's an energetic declaration. It says, I am no longer here out of need. I am here by choice. And right now, I choose me. And this is where something ancient stirs, something in the masculine psyche that recognizes when a woman is no longer available from her wounds, but from her worth. He senses it. Even before he can make sense of it, he senses it. Clarissa Pinkola Estes once wrote, a woman who knows her own worth becomes sacred territory. She is no longer accessed. She is conquered. And that's the shift. The woman who used to wait, who used to hope, who used to shrink just to be chosen, slowly dissolves. What remains is someone sacred, a woman who knows that she is the prize, that she has always been the prize. This isn't about manipulation. This isn't about playing hard to get. It's about remembering that you were never supposed to give yourself away in pieces, that love, real love, cannot bloom in the soil of self-abandonment. And the moment you come back to yourself, the entire field changes. The dynamics shift, without a single word, without a single demand, without a single effort to convince him of your worth. Something in him feels the emptiness where your energy used to live. And he wonders, where did she go? What happened to the woman who used to orbit around me, who used to fill all the empty spaces in my world? But what he doesn't yet know is that she didn't leave him. She simply came back home. Home to herself. Home to her own arms. Home to the sanctuary of her own soul. And from that place, something magnetic begins to unfold. Something ancient. Something true. A force that doesn't beg. A presence that doesn't chase. A love that doesn't compromise itself to be seen. Because it has finally remembered. It was never meant to be forgotten. And as this energy gathers, something else starts to rise. A question, quiet but powerful, echoing somewhere deep inside him. A question that wasn't there before. What if she's no longer mine? And that's the moment when something shifts inside of him. Because for the first time, he realizes your love was never guaranteed. It wasn't something he could just hold on to without effort, without presence, without offering something real in return. Louise Hay's words echo deeply here. What I value in myself, the world also values. And when a woman finally begins to value herself, when she stops offering her heart like an open, endless tab, something inside him wakes up. It's the realization that your love isn't endless when it's not honored. It's precious, it's sacred, and it's not automatic. It's fascinating how the masculine psyche works at this level. When something is always there, always available, always saying yes, even to what hurts her, the mind, the heart, the soul, begins to forget its value. Not because it isn't valuable, but because constant availability can feel invisible, background noise, always there, until suddenly, it's not. When a woman pulls away, not out of bitterness, but out of deep reverence for her own being, she sends a frequency into the field that says, I am no longer on discount. I am no longer here to be consumed endlessly without nourishment in return. And whether he understands it consciously or not, his entire system feels it. Something primal, something instinctive, begins to stir. There's a kind of hunger that only arises when the masculine senses he no longer has what he thought would always be his. A quiet panic, a realization that what once felt secure, what once felt constant, is now slipping through his fingers. And it's not just the absence that speaks. It's the dignity within that absence. The power of a woman who no longer leaks her energy trying to be chosen. Her energy isn't scattered anymore. It's contained. It's whole. It's sovereign. And it's in that very moment that something inside him understands. This isn't the kind of woman who waits. This isn't the kind of woman who negotiates her worth in exchange for crumbs of attention. She doesn't beg. She doesn't chase. And she certainly doesn't linger in places where her soul isn't nourished. But even deeper than that, the masculine begins to feel something he didn't expect. A pull. A gravitational force that doesn't come from her moving toward him, but from her moving back toward herself. And suddenly, the game he didn't even know he was playing has changed. He realizes she is no longer playing. She's no longer performing. She is no longer offering endless rehearsals of her own abandonment just to keep him comfortable. And the most surprising part is that this is the moment when his heart starts to beat differently, when desire shifts from convenience to reverence, when wanting her becomes not about possession, but about presence, about showing up in a way he never realized was required before. Because now, he knows, your love was never free. It was always sacred, always. But something even more subtle happens, something most people never talk about. When a woman steps back, when she no longer fills every empty space with her words, her care, her presence, something unexpected echoes in the silence. And that silence is louder than anything she could ever say. It's the kind of silence that lingers. It stays in the corners of his mind, in the spaces where her laughter used to live, in the quiet where her constant checking in once filled the air. That silence has weight. It has texture. It wraps around him like an invisible reminder, not of her absence, but of everything he once overlooked. Because the truth is, when a woman is always available, her presence can become so woven into his daily experience that he stops noticing, like the air he breathes, essential but invisible, until one day, the air shifts, and he realizes he's gasping, searching, wondering. Why does it suddenly feel so empty here? But it's not really emptiness. It's the absence of something he took for granted, the warmth of her energy, the gentle hum of her care, the knowing that she was always just there. And now, she's not. And it's in that hollow space that something begins to awaken, a discomfort, an ache, not because she punished him, not because she walked away in anger, but because her energy, her love, her presence is no longer being offered on autopilot. There's a profound difference between absence rooted in withdrawal and absence rooted in self-love, and the masculine feels it. He feels when a woman disappears in resentment, but he feels even more when she disappears in reverence for herself. It's not cold. It's not cruel. It's dignified. It's sacred. It's a quiet declaration that says, I no longer give where I am not received. I no longer pour where my cup is not honored. And that realization, that echoing silence, becomes a mirror, but not a mirror of her emptiness, a mirror of his, a reflection of everything he failed to notice until it was no longer being given freely, because now, the silence is teaching him what her words could never fully explain. Now, the emptiness is showing him just how full his life was when her energy was woven into it, and just how hollow it feels without it. And it's right there, in that space between what was and what now is, that the masculine begins to wonder, begins to question, begins to feel what he never allowed himself to feel before. What if she was never supposed to be the background of my life? What if she was always the center? And the realization cuts deeper than he expected, because for the first time, he understands. Her energy was never just available. It was never just there for him to consume without thought. It was given, freely, lovingly, but it was never owed. He starts to remember all the times she showed up, the times she softened her voice to keep the peace, the times she stayed, when every part of her spirit whispered that she deserved more, the way she bent, stretched, sometimes even broke pieces of herself, just to be enough for a version of love that always felt slightly out of reach. And now, with her gone, with her energy no longer feeding the spaces he didn't even realize were starving, he feels it, not just her absence, but his own emptiness. The void that her presence used to quietly, so quietly, hold together. It's a strange thing, how the masculine often doesn't realize what he's receiving until it stops being given. He assumed her warmth was endless. He assumed her patience was bottomless. He assumed her love was unconditional, not understanding that real love, true love, begins with the condition of self-honor. When she steps back, something ancient happens. The dynamic of possession dissolves, the subtle contract of dependency shatters, and in its place rises something far more powerful, the awareness that he never truly possessed her, not her soul, not her presence, not her love, because love cannot be possessed. It can only be received when it is honored. And this is when fascination begins to grow, not fascination rooted in ego, but in reverence. Because when a woman stops making herself the caretaker of someone else's emotional security, when she stops patching the holes in his soul with the fabric of her own being, something magnetic happens. He starts to realize she is no longer his to lean on, no longer his to expect, no longer his by default. And with that realization comes something else, something heavier, something sharper, the quiet, terrifying thought that he may have mistaken her devotion for permanence. And now she is no longer his. But the truth is, she was never his. She was her own, always. He just forgot. Or maybe he never truly understood, until now. And as the days pass, as the silence stretches wider, something else becomes undeniable. He starts to notice that the energy he once took for granted wasn't something that simply existed in the background. It was something being given, something being offered, over and over again. And now, it's gone. It's not that she disappeared. No, she's still here, but not in the way she used to be. Her physical absence might be subtle. Maybe she still walks through the same rooms. Maybe her voice still echoes in small conversations. But her energy, her sacred, nurturing presence, that is no longer his to access. And this is when something clicks in his soul, a memory disguised as a realization. He remembers, but differently now. He remembers the warmth that felt like home, the way her laughter softened the hard edges of his day, the way her eyes looked at him, not just seeing, but witnessing him, holding space for his fears, his flaws, his becoming. But what strikes him now is that he never truly asked himself who was holding her, who was witnessing her, who was tending to the parts of her that felt tired, unseen, stretched too thin. It's like a mirror turning back on him. For the first time, he realizes her love wasn't just something he received. It was something she poured, sometimes at the expense of herself. And now that she's no longer pouring, now that her fountain has turned inward, the drought feels unbearable, and something else begins to surface. A truth he never wanted to admit, that maybe, all this time, he wasn't loving her. He was loving how she made him feel. He was loving the way her presence filled his empty spaces. But was he truly seeing her? Was he truly loving her? This awareness, it stings, because it's not just about losing her presence. It's about realizing that he never fully understood her worth until she withdrew it, until she gathered herself back into her own arms and stopped offering pieces of herself to someone who didn't know how to hold them with care. And now, his mind keeps circling back to one aching question, a question that keeps him awake at night, a question that echoes louder with every hour of her absence. What if she's not coming back? But this is where the story quietly turns, because something happens, not just in him, but in her. The woman who once gave endlessly, the woman who waited, who hoped, who stayed, now finds herself standing in a different kind of space, a space where she is no longer looking outward for validation, but inward, for truth. When she turned her energy back toward herself, something subtle yet profound began to shift. The threads of dependency started unraveling. The silent contracts she made, the ones where her love was offered in exchange for breadcrumbs of attention, began to dissolve. And in their place rose something infinitely more powerful, a field of energy that says, I am no longer yours to possess. I am mine. And this is the paradox. The moment she no longer belongs to him is the moment he feels the most drawn to her. Not because she's playing hard to get, not because she's manipulating, but because something real, something magnetic, happens when a woman remembers her own worth. Louise Hay spoke this truth so clearly. When I love myself, I don't accept crumbs. The universe understands this command. And when a woman embodies this, not as a concept, not as a mantra, but as a living frequency, the entire dynamic transforms, because he feels it. He feels the shift from, I need you, to I choose me. And that shift is electric. It pierces through the layers of unconscious patterns. It wakes him up in ways her words never could. Her absence isn't rejection. It's not punishment. It's self-respect made visible. It's the quiet but undeniable vibration of someone who has remembered that she is her own sanctuary, her own safety, her own home. And suddenly, she's no longer part of the background of his life. She's no longer just there. She's no longer someone who revolves around his orbit, filling his emptiness while ignoring her own. Now, she is the center, the sun, the gravitational force that no longer chases, but is simply radiant in her being. And this is the moment, the very moment, when he starts to look at her differently, not as someone who was always there, but as someone who could be gone, as someone whose presence was never owed, but was a gift that, now, may no longer be his to receive. And in the quiet of that realization, something stirs, a mixture of regret, awe, and a deep, aching question, rising from the depths of his own unexamined soul. How did I not see who she truly was until now? And yet, the truth runs even deeper, because the real shift, the one that changes everything, doesn't happen outside of her. It happens within, when she stops waiting, when she stops reaching, when the old story of, if I just love him enough, he'll see me, finally collapses under the weight of her own awakening. There's a sacred power that rises when a woman realizes that being chosen was never the prize. The prize was always her peace, her presence, her wholeness, her life, fully lived, with or without him. And this is the moment where the field of dependency fully dissolves, because he no longer feels her energy wrapped around him like an invisible safety net. He no longer feels the comfort of knowing that no matter how distant he became, no matter how inconsistent his love was, she would still be there, waiting, hoping, holding on. And suddenly, that safety is gone, not because she took it away, but because she finally understood it was never hers to give. That kind of safety, the one that costs her own soul, was never love. It was survival. It was self-abandonment dressed as devotion. And as that field breaks, something undeniable happens inside of him. The masculine feels the absence not as punishment, but as an alarm, a call, a deep, primal ache that whispers, you do not possess her. You never did. You were simply blessed, for a time, by her presence. And now, that presence is no longer yours, by default. And the irony, the paradox of it all, is that in the exact moment he realizes he cannot have her, is the moment he wants her, more than ever. Not as someone who fills his emptiness, not as someone who props up his sense of self, but as someone whose light is so radiant, so whole, that being near her feels like standing in the presence of something sacred. And it's in this space, this hollow, echoing space left by her absence, that something inside of him begins to shift. The man who once took her for granted now feels the weight of her worth in every breath, in every quiet room she no longer fills, in every memory of her laughter, her tenderness, her fierce love, now woven through the silence like threads of gold. And what he feels, in this place, isn't just longing. It's reverence. It's grief. It's the bone-deep realization that love, true love, cannot exist where there is no respect, where there is no presence, where there is no reciprocity. And now, with every passing moment of her absence, the truth becomes heavier, more undeniable, more alive. He doesn't miss her because she's gone. He misses who he became when her love was near. And as the hours turn into days, and the days into weeks, a quieter truth begins to settle in. A truth that no amount of distraction, no amount of pretending, can escape. Because what he once thought was just her nature, her way of being, her endless, generous love, he now realizes was her choice, a choice she made every single day, until the day she didn't. And in that realization, he comes face to face with something he never wanted to see, that her energy, her devotion, her presence, wasn't infinite. It wasn't unconditional in the way he assumed. It was offered, until she realized that offering it without being met, without being seen, without being cherished, was an act of self-abandonment disguised as love. And now, her absence has become the most powerful presence in his life. Her silence has become the loudest thing he hears. Her choice to come back home to herself, to reclaim the pieces of her spirit that were once scattered across his indifference, has become a mirror, a reflection of everything he couldn't, or wouldn't, give her. And that mirror is ruthless. It shows him not just the ways he failed to love her, but the ways he failed to love himself, the ways he used her presence to avoid his own emptiness, the ways he leaned on her light, because he was too afraid to cultivate his own. Because that's the truth. isn't it? When a woman pours endlessly into a man who cannot or will not pour back, it's not just her depletion that happens. It's his stagnation, his refusal to grow, his avoidance of his own healing. And now, with her energy gone, the avoidance is impossible. The emptiness is undeniable. The hollow spaces inside of him, once softened by the cushion of her love, now echo back every moment he dismissed her, every time he minimized her needs, every time he assumed she would always be there. But love, real love, doesn't survive in the soil of assumption. It cannot grow where there is no reverence, no reciprocity, no presence. And now, he feels it, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a natural law, a universal truth, that the love of a woman who knows her worth is not something you can hold without holding her fully. And the ache he feels now is not just for her, it's for the man he never became while she was still his. And as that truth sinks deeper, another realization rises alongside it, one that feels both heavy and humbling, that her love, her energy, her presence was never about saving him. It was never meant to be the balm for his wounds or the scaffold for his unfinished growth. It was never supposed to be the thing that held him together, while she quietly fell apart. And now, standing in the void where her warmth used to live, he finally understands that the love she gave was never a responsibility. It was never something owed. It was a sacred offering, a gift, one that came from the overflow of her soul until the day it no longer could, because love cannot survive in captivity. It cannot survive when it's taken for granted, when it becomes invisible, when the woman offering it becomes invisible, even to herself. And this is the heartbreak he never saw coming. Not just the heartbreak of losing her, but the heartbreak of realizing that he never truly met her, not the way she deserved, not the way her spirit quietly and patiently waited for. And what surprises him even more is how much he misses, not just her presence, but the version of himself that was better, braver, more alive in the reflection of her love. A version of himself he didn't fight hard enough to become, until now, when she is no longer there, holding the mirror. Because the truth is, the feminine doesn't withdraw to punish. She doesn't pull away to wound. She withdraws to heal, to return to herself, to gather the fragments of her being that were once given away, piece by piece, in hopes that love would one day be enough. And in that withdrawal, something sacred happens. A rebirth, a remembering, a rising. And while he aches, while he wrestles with the empty spaces her love once filled, she stands quietly, on the other side of her own awakening, no longer waiting, no longer hoping, no longer shrinking, just to be held. She is, finally, holding herself. And this is where everything transforms, because in her return to herself, something ancient, something primal, something utterly magnetic begins to rise. Not from the part of her that once sought to be chosen, but from the part of her that remembers. She was never meant to beg for love. She was never meant to prove her worth. She was never meant to trade pieces of her soul for moments of being seen. Louise Hay's wisdom echoes softly in the background. What I think and feel about myself creates every experience in my life. And now, her thoughts are different. Her feelings are different. Her reality is different. Because the moment she steps out of the pattern of waiting, the moment she no longer sits in the doorway of someone else's uncertainty, everything shifts. The power dynamic dissolves. The old contracts, the silent agreements that said, "I'll keep giving as long as you give me crumbs," burn to ash. And in their place rises a woman whose love is no longer a currency of survival, but a sacred offering, first and foremost, to herself. And what he feels now is undeniable. The gravitational pull of a woman who no longer needs him, but who could, if she chose, invite him, not from a place of emptiness, not from a place of fear, but from a place so full, so radiant, so self-anchored, that being near her feels like a privilege, not an entitlement. And this is the space where respect is born, real respect, the kind that isn't negotiated, the kind that isn't begged for, the kind that rises naturally, when a woman is no longer available to be diminished, ignored, or treated as an option. And ironically, it's this very absence of need that awakens the deepest kind of desire in him, because the masculine, at its highest truth, is drawn to what it cannot possess. It is drawn to what it must rise to meet, and for the first time, he realizes she is no longer within his grasp, unless he himself becomes someone worthy of standing in her light. And as that realization ripples through him, another truth lands quietly in his chest, that the version of her who once tolerated, waited, hoped, is gone, and in her place stands a woman who knows, deeply, unapologetically, that her love is not something anyone is entitled to. It is something that must be earned through presence, through reverence, through truth. And in the quiet aftermath of that realization, something even more profound begins to unfold. Because as much as this story seems like it's about him, about his longing, about his awakening, the truth is, this was always about her. The woman who once measured her worth by how wanted she was, no longer plays that game. The woman who once stayed, even when her spirit whispered for her to leave, now listens. The woman who once begged the universe for signs that she was lovable, now knows. She was never meant to prove what was always true. Clarissa Pinkola. Estée speaks to this moment so beautifully. The woman who gathers her energy, gathers her power, and men feel this more than any words. And it's true, because what he feels now isn't just her absence, it's her power, her wholeness, her undeniable, untouchable sovereignty. And maybe the greatest irony is that the love he feels now is deeper, more reverent, more sincere than anything he ever felt while she was still orbiting his world. Because love, real love, cannot survive in the shadow of expectation. It only grows in the light of freedom. And that's the sacred paradox. The moment she no longer needs him is the moment he realizes how deeply he wants her, not from the shallow place of possession, but from the hollow ache of understanding that losing her would mean losing something rare, something holy, something that he may never find again. But here's the truth, the quiet, liberating, soul-deep truth. She didn't withdraw to make him chase her. She didn't disappear to teach him a lesson. She withdrew because she finally understood that she is her own home, her own sanctuary, her own source of love, and in that remembering, she becomes untouchable, not in the way that closes her heart, but in the way that protects it, in the way that says, I will never again abandon myself in the name of being loved. And maybe, just maybe, that is the most magnetic force on earth. The presence of a woman who no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses herself. And as this truth settles into her bones, as it anchors deeper than any story of lack, or waiting, or not being enough, something shifts not just within her, but in the very fabric of her reality. Because when a woman chooses herself, the universe listens. Life rearranges. Everything, and everyone, responds differently. The love that once felt like a game of proving dissolves. The desperation that once made her question her worth evaporates, and in its place rises a peace, a grounded, steady, unshakable peace, the kind that no man, no relationship, no absence can take away. And the most beautiful part is that in her absence from the places where she was once overlooked, she becomes more visible than ever, not because she's louder, not because she's forcing anything, but because her energy now vibrates differently. It speaks a language that only the soul understands, a frequency that says, I am whole, I am complete, I am enough. And this is the fertile soil where real love, conscious love, mature love, is born. Love that isn't built on fear, love that doesn't depend on filling each other's wounds, love that flows because two whole beings choose to meet. Because the truth is, when the desperation leaves, when the clinging dissolves, what remains is clarity. A clarity that cuts through the noise of shoulds and fears and stories that were never hers to carry. And as she stands there, fully rooted in herself, fully anchored in her own essence, something beautiful happens. The men who once overlooked her feel it. The ones who ghosted, the ones who stayed but never fully showed up, the ones who thought she would always be there, now find themselves haunted by her absence. Not because she disappeared, but because she no longer places her light at their feet. And maybe the greatest irony of all is that while he is over there, wrestling with his regret, with his realization, with the emptiness left by her withdrawal, she is no longer waiting for him to notice, because now her eyes are no longer searching the horizon. They are turned inward, toward herself, toward her own becoming. And this is where everything comes full circle. Because as she walks deeper into herself, as she gathers the fragments of her spirit and stitches them back together with threads of love, of presence, of self-respect, something profound happens. She no longer feels the ache of his absence, She no longer waits for closure. She no longer bargains with the universe, asking, "When will someone finally choose me?" Because now, she knows. She knows that being chosen by anyone else was never the point. The point was always her choosing herself, her remembering that love was never supposed to cost her, herself. And as this remembering blooms within her, the ache that once lived in her chest begins to soften. The tightness that once made her question her worth loosens its grip. The question that haunted her, "Why am I not enough?" dissolves into a deeper truth. She was never not enough. She was simply offering her love to someone who couldn't yet hold it, who couldn't yet meet it, who couldn't yet rise to the level her soul required. And now, she finally understands that his inability to love her fully was never a reflection of her worth. It was a reflection of his readiness, his capacity, his relationship with himself. And as that truth settles, a quiet freedom arises, not the loud, performative kind, but the kind that whispers through her bones, through her breath, through the spaces inside of her that used to ache. The freedom of no longer waiting, the freedom of no longer shrinking, the freedom of coming home to herself. And while he, over there, may still be learning this lesson the hard way, may still be wrestling with the echo of her absence, with the weight of his own missed chances, she has already crossed the threshold. She has already become the woman who no longer waits to be chosen, because she knows now she was the one she was always waiting for. And as her energy settles fully into this truth, the world around her shifts in ways that once felt impossible. Because when a woman rises out of the ashes of her own abandonment, when she stitches herself back together not to be more lovable, but simply because she remembers that she is, everything changes. Louise Hay reminds us, "What I think and feel about myself creates every experience in my life." And now, her thoughts are clear, her heart steady, her presence magnetic. Not because she's trying to be, not because she's performing, but because a woman who is no longer leaking her energy into the hands of those who cannot hold it becomes untouchable in the most beautiful way. And what he feels now, what every man who once tasted her love now feels, is the echo of what once was, not as a punishment, not as revenge, but as a natural law, as the simple, inevitable result of what happens when a woman finally understands that her love is a gift, not a transaction. And in this space, something else rises, something even deeper than desire, deeper than longing. It's reverence. It's the understanding that her presence was never his to own. It was his to honor, to cherish, to meet with his own presence. And maybe, just maybe, had he known this sooner, things would be different now. Maybe, if he had seen her not as a constant, but as a miracle, not as someone who would always be there, but as someone who was choosing to be there, everything could have been different. But life has a way of teaching through contrast, through the ache of what we didn't cherish, through the silence of what we ignored, through the absence of what we once believed would never leave. And while he may now sit in the quiet, tracing the outline of her absence like a man tracing the memory of sunlight on his skin, she has already stepped into a new reality, a reality where her worth is not negotiated, a reality where her love is no longer something she proves, but something she offers to those who are truly capable of receiving it. And maybe that's the most powerful love story of all. The story of a woman who finally remembered that the love she was always searching for was her own. And so, as this story gently folds into its own completion, there's one final truth that lingers, a truth so simple and yet so powerful that once seen, it cannot be unseen. Louise Hay reminds us, "The thoughts I choose to think and the words I choose to speak create my experiences." And now, her thoughts are no longer about him, no longer about whether she's enough, no longer about how to make someone stay. Her thoughts are prayers to herself. Her words are spells of remembrance. Her presence, a quiet declaration that says, "I am, and have always been, my own sanctuary." And maybe this is the secret that no one told her, that when a woman stops asking, "Why doesn't he choose me?" and instead whispers, "I choose me," the entire universe responds. The field shifts, the energy rearranges, not as a way to punish him, not as a way to make him suffer, but as a way to bring her back home, to the woman she was before the waiting, before the longing, before the ache of not being seen made her question her own reflection. And in that homecoming, something beautiful happens. The emptiness fades. The loneliness softens. The craving for someone else to fill the spaces within her dissolves into a deeper knowing. She is the love. She is the belonging. She is the one. And as for him, as for the men who once stood at the center of her storms, they are now simply witnesses. Witnesses to the woman who no longer waits, who no longer begs, who no longer shrinks for anyone. And as the screen fades, as the story settles, there's one more whisper left in the air, a whisper from every woman who has ever walked this path, a whisper that says, the woman you are becoming will cost you the girl who kept waiting, and that is a price worth paying. If this touched something in your heart, if it spoke to a part of you that's been quietly waiting for permission to rise, then you are exactly where you're meant to be. You are not alone on this journey. There is another video on the screen right now, waiting to hold you, guide you, and walk with you even deeper into this path of remembering who you truly are. I'll meet you there.